Yeah, I mean, we show it and then we talk over it, or
yeah, I think that sounds good, no? After
yeah,
like
or
maybe we
just
start
let it
a
run
bit.
now for the people. We could also let it run now for the people who
are joining.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
You want me to run that now?
Yeah, that would be great. Just mute the sound so that
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be us talking.
And before we do that, good evening, everyone from India. Thank you for joining us today. Sorry, we got a little late in starting our session, but thank you so much. I'm Shuchi. I'm one of the co-founders of the Chennai Photo Biennale, and I have with me here one of our co-curators, Boaz Levin. Hi, Boaz. And we have one of our artists, Tobias Zielony. Hi, Tobias. Thanks so much for taking the time. It's great that in spite of all of COVID happening everywhere, we are still able to navigate our Biennale in hybrid forms. So we have physical showcases that are across in the city of Chennai, which is a southern coastal city in South India. We have our exhibitions happening at roughly about 5 venues, including at the Goethe Institute with the video artwork screenings. And for all our audiences that are outside of Chennai, we have our digital showcases that you can have access to. These are also now available in our local regional language in Tamil. And we are very glad that in spite of all the odds, thanks to our brilliant curatorial team and all our artists, that we were able to pull off this edition in these difficult times. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to give a very, very quick introduction to Boaz for those of you who may or may not know him. Boaz Levin is an artist, writer, and curator who lives and works in Berlin, in Germany. Levin is the co-founder, together with Vera Tolman and Hito Sterl, of the Research Center for Proxy Politics, and more and more and more. He was also the co-curator of the Biennale for Actual Photography in Germany. So without any further delay, I am going to hand over to Boaz to take the session forward today. Boaz, do you want to just introduce our audience a little bit to what we are going to be doing next?
Yeah, maybe I'll say a couple of words before we start the video.
Yes.
Thank you all for coming. I see there are a lot of people here in the audience, which is wonderful to see. So it's thank you wherever you are for attending. Good evening and good morning for those in India. And thank you, Suchi, also for the warm introduction, and Pia for the organization. This wouldn't have been possible, obviously, without all the hard work of the team on site, because it's really quite amazing to see this coming together. And today I'll have the pleasure of having a conversation with Tobias Zielony, who's here in Berlin, not too far away from me. Tobias is known for his photographic and filmic depictions of youth and subcultures, which, although embedded in specific communities, also employ a critical approach to documentary photography. He has long been interested in exploring how images impact and inform the shaping of the self, as well as identity and community, which are all things we can talk about later extensively, especially in light of the work that we're going to discuss today. In 2015, he co-exhibited at the German Pavilion in Venice with the work The Citizen, which was a cooperation with refugee activists in Germany and newspapers and magazines in 5 African cities. He has exhibited extensively and internationally with solo shows, among others at the MMK Zollamt in Frankfurt, Camera Austria in Graz, Philadelphia Museum of Art, Maxi in Rome, Berlinische Gallery in Berlin, and maybe most importantly for our purpose today, the von der Heidet Museum in Wuppertal, which is also where Tobias was born and where the work we're going to discuss today was first shown. Also recently, just until I think a month ago or so, we had a retrospective in the Folkwang Museum in Essen, which also included this work. So without further ado, I'm really glad to invite Tobias to join us here in the conversation. We thought we'd start by showing, I don't know who from the audience, I mean, it's always hard to know who had a chance to watch this work. The work is actually available throughout the duration of the Biennale on our website. And as you see, I mean, the version that's available on the website is actually documentation of a slideshow, which for the purpose of this online presentation, we recorded Tobias talking about the images over the duration of the slideshow, 12 minutes. So we thought maybe now, just for the purpose of this conversation, we can share a screen, I mean, share the video and have it running. So this video documenting the slideshow without Tobias talking about it, because that's what we're going to do now in a moment. So that kind of defeats the purpose. But this way, maybe we can watch it together for a couple of minutes, and then Tobias and I can basically start talking, or we just start talking as it runs, I think.
Yeah.
Priya, do you want to
I'll just
share the screen?
Yeah.
Tobias, I guess you all had a chance to see Tobias, but
Hello,
you're there on the small screen now. But then we can first watch this a bit, and then
and we can just start talking about it, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So thank you, Boaz. Thanks everybody for the introduction and having the chance to be part of the biennial, and even though in this like online and hybrid form. And so this work, Haus der Jugend, in German it means something like the House of Youth, but it's normally the name for a youth club, was made for my exhibition in my hometown in Wuppertal. And here on the right, you see my nephew from Wuppertal, but a long time ago. And for that work, I looked into my archives from the years like 1997 to 2005, broadly, and to look for pictures that I had never used. Actually, I was looking for pictures from my hometown, Wuppertal, but I found so many amazing photos of that time that I took all over Germany that I decided to make a work out of it. Maybe that's how it came along, and normally it's shown as a double projection.
A two-channel slideshow, no? And
yeah, they can run independently and out of tune, out of sync. So it means the combinations are kind of random in a sense.
Yeah, the longer it runs, kind of the more the timing changes, I guess, and different combinations in the loop.
Yeah. And like the picture here on the right, I mean, it's hard to tell now with a small resolution, but there's a lot of pictures I also made where people look in the camera, like group photos that I never used.
Yeah, like this one here on the right. I mean,
yeah,
also.
For example, it's the kind of picture that you take in the beginning, like people say, oh, let's take a picture. And I say, okay, everybody look. But then at the time, I didn't use it to be part of my projects, or some of the works here never end. The project was never finished or something. So, but some pictures I was really wondering why I haven't chosen them at the time, I have to say. You know, it's only then like almost like 20 years, 15, 20 years looking back at the work and realizing that maybe I was photographing something without knowing it, or like subconsciously, that is interesting, and it's that I'm more aware of now than I was at the time.
Yeah, and I guess also you start looking for different things. I mean, that's always the interesting point about revisiting your own archive is on the one hand, there are things you didn't see, but also maybe there are things you weren't looking for in the same way, or you start, you're interested in different patterns by now. But there's also, we were talking about this in the past, I mean, there's an interesting parallel in this series between, on the one hand, it's kind of a formative phase in your career and your practice, your kind of earlier days where you were exploring and also finding your style and finding your method. But it was also a very interesting period in German history, kind of a decade, I mean, even less than a decade after the unification of East and West. And the series kind of spans cities both from the East and the West, but it's very much, it shows how you were interested in going to these locations in both the East and West, but in this kind of maybe under the influence or in the context of deindustrialization that was happening in the 90s economically.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that you just mentioned that I think at the time I was interested in already, but of course it changes its importance, or in, like, if you look back in history. So of course I was a young person and young photographer still. So a lot of these pictures, as you said, are like trying out formats and ways of photographing and discovering things or overlooking things maybe. Mm-hmm. But then of course the subject of use is also something like where things are not really clear. I mean, not the subject, but the time of being young, where things haven't been decided and kind of in the open. Mm-hmm. But like historically, so Germany the wall came down in 1989 and I lived in the West. I was like 14, 15 years old. And then Germany was reunited in 1990. So the 90s were the time where the country was supposed to grow together. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. It was also this kind of youth.
Yeah, it's like the youth of a new country somehow. Mm-hmm. But it was kind of, let's say, hit by crisis from the beginning. There was maybe a global crisis in terms of like traditional industries going down, mm-hmm. Financial crises. So it was really a tough start for this young new country, and especially people in East Germany were suffering from unemployment and also, I have to say, from being taken over by the West. So yeah, almost all of the things that were like good in East Germany were just like discarded and
dismantled,
ignored. Mm-hmm. So it was really like an identity shock for the older generation, and maybe not so much for the kids, but they were kind of inheriting that through their parent generation.
Yeah, and these type of neighborhoods that you often photographed at the time, the typical what's called in German Plattenbau, so these high-rise buildings that were built often, in mass in the East. The West had its kind of equivalent, but in the East, I think at the time there were like in 2000, there were 1 million of these buildings that were left empty. I mean, there was a mass also migration. There was massive changes in the urban landscape. So this was also a very interesting time. To see these kind of processes unfolding. But what I find is also interesting is at the same time you weren't so fixated on distinguishing, making this distinction or making these clear differences between East and West. You kind of see an overlap in this youth culture.
Yeah, I mean it's so it's not like there's on the left is East Germany and on the right is
exactly.
West. It's kind of mixing, and then there are people that maybe nowadays you would think they turn into right-wing people or like extremists even on the right. you have some kind of punkish people that you would more think about as being leftist. You have people from migrant communities. And it's weird that, I don't know if it's the way I mixed it, but these people seem to be connected somehow, at least in my work. Or maybe they're connected through the circumstances they grew up in, even, it was in the East or in the West. And maybe there was also a little bit of innocence in that regard to politics. If you look at the division that we have in Germany and all over the world, probably, now we have it about COVID, is it real or not? Or if you look at the US under Trump, it's this kind of really divided society. And I think the roots can be found maybe there, but it's not so obvious. And especially when you're young, you were still kind of moving between different groups and different ideas of yourself. So, but obviously as a German person, you can read a lot in there in terms of trying to figure out where you are, like if it's East or West. So there are all these signifiers. And of course, in the 90s, they were stronger than they are today. In terms of clothing, you mentioned the architecture, but also the cigarettes people smoke, the beer they drink, even haircuts or something. It's a bit like reading like really small signs that luckily some of them have lost their importance now.
Yeah. And how, in terms of how did the idea come about to revisit this archive? Because I imagine it's massive, and these are images you've for many years, you chose not to use as part of your kind of body of work. And this, I think, was something that you chose to do for the show in Wuppertal, no?
Yeah, so as I said, it started really that it's normal when you're invited to an exhibition somewhere, the first thing the curator would say is, do you have work from Wuppertal, or do you have work from Chennai? I've never been, but so I was looking for pictures from Wuppertal, and there are a few here in the work, but there were not so many actually. I left when I was quite young, and if I would return, I wouldn't take a lot of pictures. So, but through that, I went through my archive looking for pictures, and I discovered a lot of pictures. I was just excited. And then my first idea was, I've been photographing more outside Germany than within Germany over the last 20 years. So it was more like, first I thought I'd do this kind of European or even international version, but then I found this idea that we discussed about this kind of young, reunited country kind of helped me to focus a bit in my selection. And actually now I'm invited to an exhibition in Poland, and I did exactly that. I looked into my archive about a work I did in 2003 in Poland, and I found like 50 images that are going to show in a slide projection. But there I also found stickers on my negatives from negatives that I had already scanned, probably while looking for that project here. And then I later decided I'm not using any pictures outside Germany. So I even forgot about it, that I had already gone through my Poland archive. So yeah, it was kind of helpful to focus, to narrow it down to make it a bit more like conceptually clear what it is about.
And we saw, I think earlier you mentioned, was it your cousin or your nephew who you saw?
My nephew.
Yeah, your nephew, exactly. And then we saw, there are different kind of also closer members of your family who normally, I guess, don't appear in your work, who appear here in different parts. No?
I think here it's only my nephew. And then in my show in Wuppertal, it's also another nephew, his brother, and my father. So
yeah, and your brother.
Yeah, but that's what's happening if you look through your archive and look at pictures that you haven't taken with a specific purpose. Then because I never did a work that was about my family. I mean, not really yet. So, but still, of course, if you have a camera, you sometimes take photos when you're around town. Okay,
so the slideshow ended.
Thank you, Suchi. The slideshow is over. Yeah, it was a quick run.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a bit quick for us. But I don't know. I mean, we are definitely open to having questions. If anybody has any questions, they can put it in the Q&A box. And while those questions arrive, Boaz, do you have any other questions for Tobias?
We can continue. I think.
Yeah, we can continue.
We thought we'd just start with showing this, and we can continue talking a bit. As while maybe questions start arriving, and once we see there are some questions, we can open up to the audience. I didn't say this talk is scheduled to be roughly. We thought we'd talk roughly half an hour and then open it up for questions. So I think we have a bit more time. And it's easier to concentrate when I'm not looking at the photos. I can see Tobias. No, but it's interesting to think. I mean, both I think this question of what it means to revisit, images. Both. I mean, now I guess you work often more systematically. You have a certain idea or question or that you follow, that you try to realize. And in this case, I mean, in the case of kind of these archival works, which is, I guess, also something that you're able to do at a later stage of your career, it kind of gives you the opportunity to mine existing work, to look for patterns, and to look for maybe ideas that you didn't pursue. Which is, I wonder, I mean, how that affects maybe the way you produce new work now, or the way you think about, what it means to kind of create a composition, a set of images. Because I think what's generally the case in your work is you tend to avoid kind of single images. Your works are always predominantly a series, and it's not so much about the kind of individual Einzelbild, the single image which is supposed to function in and of itself. I mean, it's always there's always a context. And I guess there are two ways of creating this type of context: either looking back, which is what you're doing now with the Poland work, with this work, or coming with some type of, I guess, hypothesis or question, and forming that. Of course, it's always maybe more chaotic in how it actually comes about. But I'm interested in how, if producing this type of work has kind of changed something about how you come now and approach new work in any way. Yeah, in Essen, in my retrospective, there was another kind of contemporary archival work with, I think, 50 images of the last 2-3 years. So it was kind of an ongoing archive. But also they are mixing works from different locations. So maybe that work here that we looked at kind of freed my mind a little bit. Yeah. But I mean, to me, it's more exciting to do more new work than through my archive. I mean, it's kind of interesting and you learn something about yourself, but it's also not so satisfying. I mean, so. But I wonder about, I mean, I totally get that. That makes total sense. But I wonder also if it's, if it changes the type of questions or the type of, let's say, kind of organizing principles that you maybe think about now when you're producing a new work, because of what we said in the beginning, that, you know, like now you notice all these things that you didn't notice when you looked at those images at first.
Yeah, it's like when I work now, like I also started a little project, I mean, and hope it's going to be big in Poland, like a new work. And it is really weird that I'm really precise now compared to 20 years ago. So I don't take so many random photos.
Yeah.
You know, I wish I would do more. And I try to force me sometimes, or using weird films or whatever, just to have this kind of like slightly more chaotic process in which I can discover things.
More chance, I guess.
Yeah, about chance. And in my earlier work, I was really, I mean, maybe that was natural because I didn't really know what I was doing. So if you look at my old contact sheets, you will see a lot of random photos where you think, why the hell did he or me took them? And in between, you see like one amazing photo where I still think, wow, how could I do it? And you know, it's like, I don't know if I could repeat that today or something. So it's kind of weird combination. And now I think I can produce more like concentrated, faster, you know, like higher like level of output. But also it's a bit more like less random or less experimental. So, but it's kind of hard to reincorporate that to my current works. And I also have to say that I'm really interested in certain themes and subjects, like in Poland. They can be very broad, but like in my new project, but there has to be something. It's not like I go there to take like nice pictures or something.
Yeah, of course.
That helps me to focus, and it's maybe also interesting me more. And I don't feel, I have taken so many photos. It's not like I feel so satisfied with a really like good photo anymore. You know, it has to be to be in a context, or it gets meaning from things outside the pictures, you know. So, I mean, I try to do that from the beginning, but when you're a student, you still believe in the one picture or something, you know. So, but I'm actually, it's not like I stopped doing it, but it's still like a miracle. Sometimes it happens, but it's not what I'm striving for, in a sense. So I don't know how much it helped me. I think it helped me to get out of this thinking of producing series only, you know, finding a way of incorporating pictures that are kind of isolated for, you know, like, because they never ended up in a series, or a series that couldn't finish or something. So to have a chance, I think Wolfgang Tillmans, for example, he did that from the beginning of his career. So must have felt very liberating, and he can take a picture in his apartment and put it in an exhibition the next week, you know?
Yeah.
So, and I never had that freedom. So I was always more focusing on more like
on series,
clear, conceptual, or geographically informed works. So, and I hope it gives me some freedom for the future. Yeah,
but I guess that's also part of the difference, or, you know, how distinct your approach is like you said, you're not, I guess in his case, to take it was one example, there is a sense that he's very much oriented also around these kind of the single image, and that it's something that works in and of itself, and that it's also for him, you know, I guess, interesting enough for him, or something that motivates him enough. And as you said, I think you're very excited when that happens, but that's not the main motivation, to kind of get that one amazing image. And then chance plays like a greater role, I guess, in this process. And also the fact that in the end of the day, you are interested in kind of weaving a certain larger context, whether that's done in retrospect, when you go and revisit these images, or if it's done in advance, when you have a certain questions or kind of motifs, or certain, I guess, I guess tropes that you're particularly interested in. And I guess what's what for me I find is very powerful also in this work is that the formal aspect of this type of search and chance fits so well with the conceptual, or let's say the theme, the set of questions that this work presents, which is really also about, I mean, this type of triple exploration of youth. I mean, whether it's the youth that are depicted, the youth in the atmosphere of unification, and the youth of kind of the photographer.
20 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years. Not the youth of the photographer, but more this, the searching aspect. I mean, and that is reproduced also in the series, and in it's also even in the way it's kind of synced and goes out of sync. So there's something that's very free about it, and I think that's powerful, because it's always chance is something that's very difficult to conceptualize, and maybe youth, is also about chance and about this kind of openness. Oh, sorry. Cat food noise. So I guess that's something that successfully manages to layer these different aspects. I see there's one, I'm not sure if it's a question, but someone wrote, Samantha wrote your experience as director. I'm not sure if that's meant as a question.
To who? To Boaz?
No, your experience as a director. I don't know if it's meant with an exclamation mark and a smiley. I don't know if that's meant as a question to you, to talk about your experience as a director.
In terms of a film director, I guess.
I guess, yeah. I don't know. Is that Sumanat, do you maybe want to expand on this question, or is it a question? If you're still here, I don't know if we'll get an explanation, or maybe it was just a
smiley.
Yeah, a smiley, exactly, which is also fine.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about that maybe another time, but I'm also doing videos and film
and stop motion. I mean, videos and kind of various forms of moving images.
Yeah, so I mean, I cannot talk about them now because we don't see it, but I mean, one part of it is also talking about, especially the animations, the stop motion. It's about all the things that a photograph can do, in a sense. So that it can also form together, not a series, but also if it's kind of animated, it becomes alive somehow, So it turns into a film or like an animation that is kind of running, but it's also stopping. But it's still like in most of the videos, I'm happy if people realize they can see the way it's constructed. So you kind of, it's not like you get sucked into like a perfect illusion, like maybe in a Hollywood sense, but you always stumble upon the production and construction of the work. And I guess even in the photographs, there is something maybe coming from the other side that's artificial or something, so that people realize it is the way things were there in front of the cameras, but also they're not. It is because I was there. There is this kind of feeling that you always try to make a picture about the world, but each time you do it, you already kind of create something that you kind of fictionalize something. Or maybe the world is never without that kind of narrative construction of narratives. Yeah. I'd like to, if I can share my screen. Can you see that picture?
Yes.
Yeah. So because we were talking about my show in Essen, my retrospective, and so it was a huge show, like showing 20 years of work. And the first room of the show was where the slideshow was shown that we just looked at, like with my oldest pictures. And this was kind of the last room, if you went in the perfect order. And this is what I said before. It's this kind of contemporary archive of images. And they also come from the last years, but they come from different locations all over the world. But it's also breaking free of that kind of boundaries of telling us a specific story about a specific place and looking at some more like global or personal or even universal, if you can still use that term, ideas, at least in terms of fashion. And there's also this kind of feeling of you're in an animation, like things are kind of stuck next to each other or on top of each other, almost like with kind of not violent, but with force. But there's also something Instagrammy about it. This kind of weird, almost random combination of images that kind of compete with each other.
Yeah, and I guess you can all see that some of them are really layered on top of each other. So it's almost, they're all hanging lightly stuck to the wall, but then with some overlap, some of them layered on top. So it's almost like has this internet feel to it, like windows overlapping or tabs, which I thought was interesting, and also has something of this, as you said, with your work with animation. There's something that, again, that the artifice is always exposed, and there's a play with again, chance or a certain likeness, to what this type of order or curation, what it amounts to, which I think is interesting. I see the person who asked the previous question says, I was asking to share your experience about your directing, to share about your directing experience, which I think you have now. Talking a bit about this, your work in video and your emphasis on the visibility of the artifice, or this kind of the fact that you don't really produce what people call the suspension of disbelief, so there's always a sense that this is a medium and these are images, even if it's moving and even if it's creating an animation.
Also we could talk about the term documentary. If you look at this work, maybe the way the pictures are produced, you could still somehow call some of them documentary, even though maybe there's some family members, but also some are stills from videos I made, and some were like people wrote me on Instagram if I want to photograph them. So I don't know really what the term documentary means anymore, but also the way it's presented. It's obvious that it's not like a documentary in a traditional sense, but if you think about it, you could kind of still wonder, what is it documenting? If you would kind of use that term. And you would end up with a certain kind of atmosphere and feeling or uncertainty, or maybe an idea of a personal diary. So so it's also questioning that, how can you make a picture of the world? How can you relate to the work in pictures if the world itself is kind of made up out of pictures? So I think that's...
And I guess that also connects to what you were saying about your filmic work, in the sense that your documentary is always, I think, something that's very consistent about it, that it's also always exposing exposing kind of yourself, and also revealing its artifice. So if maybe traditional documentary often relied on a certain illusion of transparency, or that the medium is, just a window into the world and it doesn't exist. In your case, it's very visible. There's something tangible about it. There's something, unapologetically photographic, or kind of, artificial, but not in a bad sense. but there's the sense, yeah, there's this presence of kind of artifice, I guess, which is interesting. I mean, which creates kind of a different approach to documentary, to what this means.
Are there any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, let's see. I don't see any. I mean, we've spoken now. It's already almost 40 minutes, so we can, if there are any questions, we can talk a couple more minutes.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah,
sure.
Of course.
I wanted to check, how do you navigate consent when you're documenting a work like this, right? It's across a period of time, sometimes photographs that you've taken much earlier, and now that you're presenting it in as a body of work. When you were making, maybe they were just individual images. You said you didn't know what you were at that point, thinking about. How does consent play a role here? How do you ensure that people are okay? They were different at that point. I don't know, where they are at this point. How does that play into a project like this?
Yeah, with the archival work, I think it's sometimes not possible. So I would also be careful with showing that work in, just anywhere, everywhere or something, or using pictures in publications or something, like newspapers. And I was actually thinking a lot about that, especially some works are from Chemnitz. And I did another project 2 years ago in Chemnitz, and it's famous for a right-wing terrorist group that were based there. And I was photographing there at the same time. They lived undercover there in this kind of housing complex. So when I went through the archive, I was really worried, or like I would have accidentally photographed some of them, And of course, I thought the people that I photographed then maybe turned into whatever right-wing assholes who get really mad if I show their pictures. So I was kind of a bit careful who to choose. But I would say for the works, like all the content, like all the new works of the last years, consent isn't a problem. I would think it's either in written consent, or there's kind of other ways of consent in terms of there's a long exchange through Instagram or email, and a kind of transparency that who I am and what I'm doing with the picture. So I don't see that so much as a problem anymore. And I also, I mean, I wouldn't also take pictures anymore of people that are in distress or something, so I believe more in kind of empowering pictures. But obviously when you start as a young photographer studying documentary photography, you're always on that edge. So yeah.
There's also been, we've spoken about this in the past, that there's a very interesting, another kind of interesting aspect of the series, that it's all kind of prior to the advent of the smartphone. So the youth that's depicted there's a sense that they're not as habituated to to kind of performing in front of a camera as maybe youth nowadays is, which is, I mean, nowadays it's so prevalent, and people are so, as you said, like I think consent is also less maybe of an issue because it's so, I mean, you can both track people, like contact them on social media. Often they contact you. Everyone's already photographing themselves. There's a whole different kind of, maybe you can talk a bit about this.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like time, the last pictures of the slideshow is the one where people photograph themselves with cell phones, these early like foldable cell phones that have a camera. And so that's kind of the end point. And to me, this totally changed the way people think about photography and deal with the camera and deal with images in general. And I have to say, also become a lot more in charge. They know what's going on.
More savvy, so more, or literate, kind of more image literate.
Totally. So also my role is kind of just one of many, you know, so they're not so excited anymore often about my pictures. And sometimes they also, I send them the pictures. I always do that if I photograph people, like the same day or the next day, I send them not all, but maybe 10 or 20 pictures, and they can post them or whatever. So they often post it way before they're exhibited or something. And also some people tend to do funny things with my pictures, you know. Like there was one guy in Latvia, he turned it into black and white and put some artificial dust on the picture. So it looks like a vintage black and white photo. So, but I mean, at first I'm like, oh my God, but then I actually like it, you know. Yeah. So it's kind of funny to see the life of images that are out of my control somehow.
It's the afterlife of your work.
My afterlife, yeah.
Your image is becoming memes.
Yeah, not yet.
Anything can happen.
Yeah.
Great. I mean, I think if there are no further questions, we might call it, bring this conversation to an end.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else has, I don't see anything.
Yeah, now is the time, last 2 minutes, in case if anybody has any questions. But do check out the work online. We've shared the link with you here in the chat. We also have a screening room that is on at the Goethe Institute. For those of you who are in Chennai, you can also come to the Goethe Institute and check out some of the video artworks. The physical shows are on only till the 6th of February. So do catch them while they're still happening. COVID is highly unpredictable. So yes, please do catch them. And thank you, I think, Tobias, for this lovely chat and for this conversation today. We look forward to doing more very soon. I mean, of course, there are a lot of programs that are happening. So stay tuned. We have another talk coming up on the 27th with one of our other artists, Michael Hanna. And would be lovely if all of you can join. Thank you.
Thanks again, Tobias. Thank you all for coming.
All of you.
Yeah.
I have to run already. So I have a 2-hour stopover in my apartment. And I'm invited for a show about August Sander, the famous German photographer, who was my first hero. So it's a show about his work, and they invited some contemporary photographers. So I'm really excited to go and set up my work today. Yeah.
Nice.
Okay.
Have fun.
Thanks, Tobias.
Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck with the rest of the time of the biennial.
Thank you.
Yeah.